name is Jason Christopher Hartley. I'm the author of Just Another Soldier, A Year on the Ground in Iraq, and I am an infantryman in the New York Army National Guard. I grew up in suburbia, Salt Lake City, Utah, for the most part, just right outside of Salt Lake. I'm the oldest of six, kind of a very typical Mormon upbringing, very wholesome, going to a lot of church. And I joined the Army when I was 17. They have a program that allows you to join, like the reserves, either the National Guard or the reserves, while you're still in high school, go to boot camp, come back, finish your senior year, and then go back to training and finish all your advanced training. So that's what I did right after I turned 17 in January, and I had enlisted by February. I enlisted the day after the ground war for the first Gulf War started. And what I've always told people why I joined, which is the most honest answer I can give you to why I joined, is that I was 17, and that's it. It was the first adult decision that I got to make. I grew up playing G.I. Joe and stuff like that, so it's like a fun thing. Like, oh, hey, I can kind of, be a Boy Scout or a kid for their perpetually, and it appealed to me, so I joined. Wow, I haven't talked about this one in a while. It was okay. I'm from Utah. Nothing happens in Utah. I moved to New York City in 2000. The towers come down in September 2001. Um, of course, my initial reaction is one of complete disbelief. They say how sometimes you can look right at something and not believe it. Well, that was the first time I ever really experienced that, where I get a phone call, my buddy says, hey, the towers have been hit. I'm like, shut up, asshole, don't call me before noon ever again, and don't tell me ridiculous crap like that, come on. Then I realized he's not kidding. Watching the news, walk out to West Broadway. By the time I walked out to West Broadway, the first tower had already fell. And I'm looking right at where it was, and I'm not seeing it, and just like, where's the tower? I don't get it, what happened? I'm looking right at the sky, and I could not process that the tower wasn't there. I walk away to try and watch some news. I'm like, maybe I should just watch it. I go back the second time, now the second tower's fallen. So, it's probably been said a bazillion times. The feeling of complete disbelief. I figured pretty much any National Guardsman in New York City at that time knew they were going to get called up. So we just all, without even being told, started like congregating at our respective armories. And we were at Ground Zero, or near Ground Zero that night. The first 2 days we guarded an area a few blocks away, from the site. And then by the third day, the third to the 11th day, so I guess it was like the 22nd, we just did what we do as soldiers, which is guard stuff. We worked 12-hour shifts. My platoon in particular was stationed between buildings 4 and 5. And all we did was guard. We set up a perimeter around a big hole, and our job was to simply screen who came in to the hole. The fire chief was in charge of the site, and he would tell us, okay, here, we're going to only let iron workers in, or only let in EMS workers with dogs. And that's what we did. We just kind of stood there, guarded stuff, and told people who didn't have the correct authorization from the fire chief to fuck off, which was actually kind of interesting because anyone who has a suit or a badge or anything was down there, to include FBI, CIA, NSA guys. Everyone showed up. There was firefighters came from Minnesota wanting to help, who we had to turn away, which was kind of heartbreaking. And that was our job, just to kind of guard a big hole. There was some kind of unscrupulous stuff that I think a lot of people don't love talking about, and looting was a bit of that. And it's hard to think about, because it's not, when we think about Ground Zero and 9/11 and all the incredibly heroic things that took place that day, and the amount of the outpouring of basically this love that came from the people who were in the air. We have just kids from the Lower East Side running around with like donut carts, giving us donuts just because they want to, and there's all these wonderful stories. But then there's also the stories too of there was a soldier in my, one of our soldiers had found like a box of money, and he didn't even cross his mind that it was wrong to loot it. He ended up getting kicked out of the Army for just being an idiot. There were I know there were some problems too with people who are in positions of trust, who were taking advantage of the fact that a lot of the stores, especially in the basement of the World Trade Center, were now broken and unguarded. And I think that's really kind of a sore spot for a lot of people. I don't know a whole lot of details, so I'm being kind of careful about what I say about it, but there were some problems with that, and it was handled, and hopefully that's kind of the end of it. I started writing my blog about my experiences pretty much immediately. I mean, I was a computer science major at the time. I've always been kind of a big geek. So it was, blogs were just kind of starting to really, pick up steam, but was still kind of more of the realm of the geek people that actually kept blogs. So my thinking was, rather than write 1,000 emails, kind of being repetitious to all my friends and family, I'll just, use this blog thing, write stuff once, post it, and then just tell everyone, here's where I'm going to keep my writing. If you want to know what's going on, just kind of go here. So initially, it was really just a practical thing to keep the blog, and I started immediately. I mean, the moment that we got the orders that we were going to begin the training to go to Iraq, I did my first blog entry, which was, September of 2003. Since we were there for OIF2, wasn't quite the wildness of an initial invasion of a country, but still early on enough that Iraq was the Wild West at that point. We could kind of do virtually whatever we want and not have to explain anything. Or at least, we didn't. Now it's like you fire your weapon, you're going to do 10 pages of paperwork. Back then, we had a lot more freedom. So we actually were able to hire a local company based out of Baghdad, an Iraqi company. They came and installed for us satellite internet, and we had internet for our entire bunker. My platoon lived in empty ammo bunker near the Balad Air Base, and we just kind of all set up, myself and another geek had set up the routers, and we pretty much every soldier in that bunker had an internet connection. I didn't want to consider myself a news source. I wasn't interested in providing some kind of, oh, here's what's really happening. That's never been my mentality at all. I've always been in the Army primarily as kind of an experiential thing, which might, sound kind of sacrilegious. Yes, there's all the things about the military that are very rewarding, and it's very true. The duty, the self-sacrifice, the being part of something bigger than yourself, the brethren, all of that is absolutely true, and these are reasons why I re-enlist. But the thing that, on a personal level, that has always been most interesting to me is what the experience feels like. And so when I started writing, I wrote what I would want to read. Before I deploy, I'm going online trying to find blogs, and I want to know how guys are feeling. I just want to know what it's like. I don't really want to know like the details of the facts, the stuff you'd read, like say in the Times. I just want to know what it feels like, what does it smell like? What was the first thing that went through your mind the first time you fired your weapon? Stuff like that. And I kind of feel like was really got neglected a lot. And that's really what I try to focus on is here's the mundane, kind of silly, a lot of times absurd stuff that we do. And here's why I'd like to believe perhaps universally interesting to you and me, a person who's in combat and a person who isn't, because at its core, our experience is all, I'd like to believe, pretty universal, regardless of situation or, setting. Well, I got in trouble 2 times. The first time was not so serious. My commander had found that I had this blog through, I think, his wife, which I'm sure kind of upset him on an ego level to have his wife telling him something about his own company. He had asked me to take it down. So I did. But I kept writing. But then towards the end of the tour, I thought, well, I kind of want to put this back up. And the way that I remember the conversation that I had with my commander is he said, look, I want you to voluntarily take it down. And I told him, well, if you're asking me to, no. My answer is no, I'm not taking it down. Then he asked my first sergeant to ask me, as a favor to him, to take it down. And actually with my platoon sergeant. I respected my platoon sergeant greatly, so I said, okay, I'll take it down, but not because I want to, but as a favor to that guy. And I did, and this was fine. But then toward the end of the tour, there was one night I'm drinking Jim Beam with my buddy. It was like one of the only nights I actually had booze in Iraq. And I decided, I think, fuck it, I'm gonna put it back up. Which was really just a matter of sort of like turning it back on, because all the material was already there at the host, at the blog. And it went back up, and it only took about a week before my leadership defined that the blog was back up online. And then that was really kind of a shitstorm happened after that, where my commander threatened to court-martial me and I was taken off mission. It was this huge investigation. But in the end, I ended up getting hammered with disobeying a direct order, and pretty much that's about it. And I got reduced in rank from sergeant to specialist, lost $1,000 of the pay, and it took me about 2 years to actually get that rank back. They initially had told me that I had violated the Geneva Convention because of photographs of detainees. That I had, the big one too was conduct on becoming a non-commissioned officer, primarily for a photograph of me on the crapper with my buddy at Fort Drum, and it was like ass cold. It was a funny picture, but my commander like really took exception to that. Why would you put that? It's your naked asses on the whole internet. What would your mom? How are you gonna explain this to your kids? I'm like, I'm gonna tell them that it was cold and I was on a crapper, and it was kind of funny. And I don't know. They also, there were some other charges that were all like, it was the one violating the Geneva Convention. I'm like, come on. If I tortured somebody, yeah, that's violating the Geneva Convention, but whatever. Well, my experience combat-wise while I was in Iraq was mild. I mean, we kind of joked about it being like combat light. We had no illusions about where we were. We weren't in Fallujah. We weren't part of the invasion of Samara. We weren't like shooting people every day. I fired my weapon 3 times at people with, the intent to kill them twice. And even for where I was, that was like, there was only one other guy in my company, I think, who fired his weapon 4 times. But nonetheless, I mean, to be honest, the few times when I had fired my weapon, those were the greatest moments of my life. I mean, I think I have like reverse PTSD, where I think about firing my weapon every single day, but not in the way that like, oh, that was horrible, I can't stop thinking about it. It's like, that was so fucking cool. I wish there was a way that I could relive it every single day. So, I mean, it is very visceral, and you feel incredibly focused. I almost feel guilty, like, explaining this sometimes, but like, it was, for lack of a better word, it was fun. I mean, it felt good. But maybe that's because I was lucky enough to not actually kill anyone, to not have to see the result of the violence. I just got to have kind of all the upside and none of the downside. I got to have a small degree of a fear for my life, and I got to respond to it in a way in which I was trained, and it was exhilarating. The first time that I fired my weapon was incredibly dissatisfying because it didn't fire, which was also profoundly disconcerting. It was kind of a stupid situation where we were out doing a patrol near one of the oil pipelines. It was dark. We were kind of in Timbuktu. It was the kind of no man's land. And there was a farmhouse, and the guy who lived here, his family, they had a ton of dogs, so of course the dogs are all kind of freaking out and barking. Like, the guy knows what that means. He knows that there's somebody poking around that probably shouldn't be there. So we have night vision, but I can barely see this. I see a guy come out of his house, and I see that he has an AK-47, and he fires a warning shot into the air to kind of like let whoever's out there know that, hey, I'm here, I have a weapon, don't fuck with my house. So I stop and I'm like, okay, well, this is kind of what I'm perceiving. I can't think of a really good reason to return fire. And as I'm going through this thought process, one of my saw gunners just opens up. He's like, brah, just start lighting the house up. And then everyone starts shooting. I'm like, well, crap. If everyone's shooting, I'm not going to not shoot. So I guess I'll shoot too. So I think, well, I'll just shoot. I'll suppress this guy. I know he's probably not a threat, but so long as we can keep his head down, I'll just fire over his house. I was aiming into the roof of the house. And so the first time I squeezed the trigger, it just kind of went click, which was like not what you want to have happen as an infantryman. It really freaked me out. And in retrospect, I think what had happened is just I had reloaded the same first round in that magazine so many times that maybe the primer had been dimpled, and I don't know. I couldn't figure it out. It sucked. So I racked the weapon, charged a new round, and I was good to go after that. But and that was the first time I ever fired my weapon. It's the second time I fired my weapon. Yeah, that was a lot more satisfying because it went the way that it was supposed to. And also that one was a lot more sort of ridiculously Hollywood, where there was like a car driving down the road that we thought was a bad guy, and all of us in liners kind of shooting at it like this. Yeah, I basically spent an entire magazine shooting at a car that I really couldn't hit, but it did feel a lot better that this time the weapon actually worked. I mean, having your weapon not work in combat, that kind of shit will give you nightmares for the rest of your life. That is what you not want to have happen as an infantryman. So yeah, it was a lot more satisfying. the second time, even though we didn't really get our target. The way that we had it set up, we had this ammo bunker that we lived in. We actually, partway through our tour, got like a shower shack that had a big, like a water jug on top. That would get refilled like every 3 days. We had a ton of bottled water. We would just get pallets and pallets of like 1 liter size bottles of water on a pretty regular basis, and we did everything with bottled water. Yeah, we did. Where I was, we did not have any running water. Yeah, we had porta potties. When we had first gotten there, the guys who had already been there for roughly a year, they had built a bunch of their own porta johns. And then the way that what we would do is you just got like a 55-gallon drum, you cut like the bottom off of it, weld handles onto it, and then just you crap into that. You have these wooden plywood crappers, and you poop into this piece of 55-gallon drum, and then basically about every day, you'd have to grab some private, give them a 5-gallon jug of diesel, and say, go burn shit. And then with the big aluminum temp pole, you pour the diesel in, light it, and then just stir it with the big stick for like about an hour. You have to keep stirring it too. It's one of the most disgusting things you ever had to do. And that's how we took care of going to the bathroom. But then when we only had to burn stuff for like about a month or so. Then we contracted somebody out to actually come in and do the whole porta john service. Privacy is interesting in the infantry. Yes and no. Since we're all in one giant bay, which is a kind of a situation that soldiers are generally very familiar with because that's a common way barracks are set up. We have all these bunk beds, basically, in this big bay. There's probably no more than 36 of us in this space, and there isn't any privacy. So the only time you have any privacy is maybe you might have partial privacy when you go to the shower. You have privacy when you go to the porta-john, and if you were lucky enough to have a bottom bunk with the bunk beds, you could construct a jack shack, which means you take 2 ponchos and you kind of like drape it over your area from the top bunk and make like a little tent for yourself. And everyone kind of generally knows that if the sides are down on the jack shack, that you're to not be disturbed. There was a good bit of that. Since we had internet in our bunkers, a lot of guys. IM was huge, definitely. Sometimes a little bit of video chat. I don't think anyone used Skype specifically. There was an internet cafe of sorts that the Army had set up that we would have to drive like a mile on a different spot in the base, and we could use their computers. They didn't have, I don't think they had webcams, but they did have a couple of phones. So a lot of guys would make kind of like the dilly trek to the phones and to those computers, but most of us just sat in our bunker and we stayed connected back home primarily through instant message. I think in a lot of ways we don't know so much what's going on. I mean, we did read a fair amount of news. Well, I should say myself and a lot of my friends, we would read a lot of news, but not really that much. And then what we experienced while we're there is it's like really the whole forest for the trees thing where we could tell you a lot about our specific missions or anything like on a tactical level, but as far as like kind of more overarching, big picture type stuff, you back in America watching the news would probably have a better grasp of what's going on big picture-ish than we would have, definitely. Well, yeah, that's kind of the drag, and I guess really kind of the standard thing with combat. In my area, roughly speaking, anytime there was any kind of engagement, there would, and this is by my own non-scientific count, there would usually be about 1 combatant killed for 3 non-combatants killed. And by combatant, I mean like good guy, bad guy, insurgents, coalition forces. So shooting starts, maybe a couple of combatants go down, tons of women and children get blasted in the process, which I think is, I don't know, in my humble opinion, I think is kind of a statistic that isn't looked at often enough. Is combat's great and everything, but if you're there ostensibly to help a people, but in the process of helping them, you're kind of like killing all of them. It's maybe someone should look at that more closely. Paul Rieckhoff, the executive director of IAVA, had a kind of a really good way of putting it. Is that we're creating enemies more quickly than we can kill them. Because you run in someone's home, you kind of accidentally kill a lot of people. That's never a good thing. You're making enemies a lot faster than you'd like. This is a topic that is tricky for me because I don't know. As far as soldiers go, I'm probably one of the more liberal soldiers you're ever going to meet. I really like the idea of everything being completely egalitarian. But this is the one topic that I have the most difficult time trying to reconcile. Is the short answer is no. I absolutely do not think women should be in the infantry. And if I had to boil it down to a single reason, there's guys will list all kinds of reasons about why it's not a good idea for women to be in the infantry. Some of them, I guess, have more weight than others. But I think for me, if I had to boil it down to one thing, it would be just that it's easier to maintain discipline with a bunch of dudes if there's no chicks anywhere, is the bottom line. Because, and that I know infuriates my friends when I say that. But, if I'm honest, when I'm doing my job in the Army, there's not usually going to be a whole lot of girls around. And then whenever there is, that's where all my focus is, especially if I'm working with her. I'm thinking, what can I do? How can I sleep with this girl? That's all that I'm thinking about. And then after that, then I'm sort of thinking about my mission. Okay, I need to make sure that I'm, covering my sector and killing bad guys and what have you. How can I sleep with this girl? I mean, I think it's like the reason why you have like boys' schools or all girls' schools. It's just to like remove the distraction. And then of course there's other reasons that come into play. Hygiene is kind of a deal. Psychologically, it can be very difficult for guys working with women, especially if the women are lost in combat. There can be a ton of infighting, love triangles. The list kind of goes on and on, but I don't have a good, solid intellectual answer that I can tell you that I feel good about. All I can say is I just don't like working with women in that capacity. I like being able to be kind of like a barbaric pig while I'm carrying a rifle, be completely primal, and just leave it at that and not have to apologize for any of it. I think don't ask, don't tell is a stupid fucking policy, and I can't wait for them to repeal that shit. It's just lame. There's countless times in which extremely qualified soldiers have been outed for whatever reason, and then weren't allowed to. There's been a lot of articles about this in the Times. Officers who are completely competent, who we're in desperate need of certain jobs, but then it's like we're kicking people out because we're not fans of their personal sexual practices. It's just dumb. Guys, homophobia is still kind of alive and well in the military, especially in the combat arms, and you kind of have to appreciate how that affects the perceived morale. Soldiers I really do still kind of freak out about the idea of homosexuals being able to serve openly in these jobs where we work together very, very closely. And I can appreciate that it can't be dismissed out of hand. Even if I think that their way of thinking is maybe unevolved, it doesn't matter. It's still very prevalent and it's important. My humble opinion, I think that if Don't Ask, Don't Tell is repealed, I don't think it's going to change the culture of the military very noticeably at all. It's not like there's going to be some huge influx of queens, are going to enlist in the military to prove a point. There may be people that do that, but I don't think it's going to be an issue. There's not going to be guys just coming out of the closet left and right. It's not going to destroy morale. It's going to be business as usual, and you might occasionally have a guy who, is open about it, and it changes nothing because you've already been working with the guy for 20 years or whatever, and you like him. It's like, oh, well, gosh, I guess it's not as big a deal as I thought it was, and life goes on. I think the biggest misconception for sure that everyone has about military service in general is they always say, oh, I could never join the military because I don't like being told what to do. I hear that so often, and that's the biggest misconception. Yes, you get told what to do because that's how you get work done, not because it's not like there's people who join the military like, oh, I just love being yelled at. I have no self-esteem, and I want someone to just demean me all the time and tell me to do stupid stuff. No, that's none of us join for that reason. It's worrying about being told what to do is kind of so completely secondary for soldiers when they serve. That's just a way of accomplishing work. There's so much else that comes with service that is satisfying and rewarding that you don't really, you stop thinking about the whole, oh my goodness, I'm being yelled at by somebody kind of thing. The camaraderie is definitely maybe even the most rewarding part of it. I mean, as an individual, our ability to experience is completely limited to what happens, inside the little prison of our own skulls. And I mean, this is probably, I don't really play a whole lot of team sports, so I imagine this is something that athletes could tell you all about and probably articulate it better than I could. But to be able to accomplish anything that requires a lot of people acting in concert is just, it feels phenomenal. Even in a job that's like inherently so completely destructive, it still is satisfying to be able to say, okay, we had that building, we had to raid it, we accomplished the missions, we found the bad guys, we detained whoever, and the only way that we were able to do it was by all of us acting together inherently selflessly, and accomplishing the task. And that's the kind of thing that I don't think you never really get tired of that feeling. It feels you always want to be repeating that feeling because, you can't build something by yourself. It takes a whole group of people. And when you have a group of people who know how to do something well and you execute it, yeah, it's satisfying. And that's what it all really boils down to is the camaraderie. That's how you get it done, is because you feel close to the people you're working alongside. First, I thought that, oh, I'm 17, I'll join the army, and somehow they'll magically transform me into a man, and I'll be a badass afterward. That never happened. That was a misconception. Um, I don't know. I don't feel as though I really had that many misconceptions. You kind of join, and you're fairly clueless. I mean, I've always sort of said I think that people tend to join the military for really dumb reasons, really bad ones, generally, because you're usually young when you do it, and you kind of like in the back of your head think, oh, I'm gonna maybe get a chance to kill someone. I just want to blow stuff up. It's gonna get me girls. Something not terribly evolved. But I think people tend to re-enlist for a lot better reasons. You realize the ways in which it's rewarding, and it actually feels good. I mean, I'm kind of a lazy dude, and the fact that I have a thing that I've been able to do regularly and feel, I maybe, I'm broke most of my life. At least I've been providing some kind of service, maybe that might be of some benefit to somebody, and at least I have that, and that does feel good, and it feels good to re-enlist for that reason. Oh wow, that's a very loaded question in a lot of ways. First off, soldiers hate the word hero, but in this context, you're using it kind of completely differently. Who are my heroes? Gosh, I really had to think about that. Um, Henry Miller kind of comes to mind first, just because of the way that he writes. He was one of the first writers that I've ever read who, as kind of a young teenager, I'm like, I had no idea you could like write stuff like this and get away with it. I felt like I discovered this world of like, oh wow, you can kind of do whatever you want so long as it's on the page because no one's really paying attention to it so much as other things. This is going to sound kind of random as hell, but Jeff Buckley, if I could think of one person who I wish that there were a way that I could model myself after, if I could be like him, it would be the musician Jeff Buckley. He just seems like a nice guy, I want to be a nice guy. How can I do that? So yeah, Jeff Buckley, he's dead, which bums me the hell out, but he would definitely be a hero. Writing's definitely harder. I mean, soldiering's great. I mean, soldiering is wonderful because it's sort of, for me, it's the easiest thing you'll ever do because the hardest thing is enlisting. Once you're in, then it's like you're on a roller coaster. There's nothing more you have to do. You just have to do what you're told. And sometimes it's really nice to like know, okay, here's what I'm doing. I'm going to wake up here. I'm going to go do this. And then I come back. There's no homework. I don't have to worry about it afterward. I'm done. Then I can go like watch DVDs and play video games and do it again the next day. It's an incredibly addictive way to live. For me, no better way of putting it. It's just it's nice. It's nice to not have to kind of like think about certain things and just be the person who suffers, and it's cold and you're freezing your balls off, and then this and that, and then something fun happens and you do it again, and you just kind of the cycle continues. Writing requires, for me, so much more because I have to think, I have to worry about what am I writing, I have to spend time doing research perhaps, and then of course there's like an amazing suffocating amount of self-doubt. Should I be writing this? Then there's all kinds of anxiety about the writing, and you go, so writing, as enjoyable as it can be at times, and incredibly rewarding. Definitely a lot harder than soldiering, frankly. The play in a nutshell for me personally was a complete head fuck. It was a great experience. Okay, let me back up. There's a guy that I worked with as a military advisor on a film. For his film, he needed a bunch of actors to be trained to look like soldiers. So I did some basic training with these actors. I taught them some really plain vanilla, close quarters, like urban warfare type stuff. He loved the training and wanted to figure out a way to take the training and actually make it part of an audience participation play. This play got called Surrender, and the way that it worked is we would have the audience members come in, we would issue them boots, uniform, and a replica rifle, and then for an hour and a half I would train them in the basics of weapons handling and close quarters battles. And then after the training was complete, we had like a little complex we had built in the theater. It's like 9 or 10 rooms. They would go through and they would utilize all the training that I had just given them, which involved encountering civilians and sometimes bad guys, sometimes shooting, sometimes not shooting. People would die, sometimes their comrades would die. And then after that act was finished, there would be kind of there was like a surreal third act where we explored various issues that soldiers might deal with on the return from combat. For me, it was strange because I wasn't playing a character named, Sergeant Joe Snuffy. I was Jason Hartley, who was just simply training audience members when they came in. I'm not an actor, and I didn't see it as acting. I was just kind of doing what I do in the Army. The actors who I trained to be soldiers, they were all actors. They were pretty good at what I had taught them to do, but they used their own names. So they were Sergeant Smith, they were Sergeant Best. And so it was kind of that line between, well, am I playing a character or am I playing myself, was weird. For me, that was the head fuck, because then I'm like, well, I'm basically acting in a way that I normally do in the Army, except to its maximum. I mean, I definitely can at times if I need to. I'm generally not a really authoritarian leader when it comes to my soldiers. I'm kind of laissez-faire, and I'm only very strict and authoritarian when it's absolutely necessary. Because it's just not how I want to be, which sometimes makes my life miserable in the Army, but whatever, that's a whole other issue. For this, I was definitely turning up to 10 my ability to be, a very loud, very strict authoritarian leader, which is what was necessary for the experience to be good, in my opinion, for the audience members. So, but now I'm kind of like ratcheting this up, and I'm like, and it's not really me. It's not how I normally act. So is it a character? Am I playing a character, or is it still me? I don't know. And then to kind of further make it so complicated is, I got very close to the cast and sometimes audience members who would come on a regular basis, and it feels kind of weird talking about this, but I felt as though I was adored by so many people because I was such a tremendous asshole. And that went completely against kind of like all that I feel as though I've had issues with my father and I dislike him because he's an authoritarian. Now what am I doing? Now I'm like authority personified for an hour and a half in this play, but now everyone likes me, but it's not really me because, I'm kind of this laid back, nice guy who wants to model himself after Jeff Buckley. But now suddenly I'm getting the love and respect I never got in the rest of my life, and like it became tricky, the identity thing. Who am I? Am I acting? Is this me? Am I playing a character? I don't know. I really still haven't even come any remotely close to sort of reconciling these. I don't know. And then we're supposed to play again in Germany, like in this summer, and I don't know. I put a lot of effort into trying to construct how especially the first act and the second act of the play worked, to try to get a person, or maybe an average person, to sort of experience that sense of disorientation. And it's really not that difficult to construct that situation. First off, constant pressure has to be applied to the person as they come in. So an audience member comes in, they don't know what they're getting themselves into. I automatically am kind of, terse or loud, yelling at people, telling them this and that. The idea was to always keep the people at least a little bit off balance. So you always kind of have an elevated heart rate, your motor skills kind of go to crap. When you're the least bit stressed out, making simple decisions can be incredibly difficult. But that's the whole experience, is having that pressure applied, putting a person in a very unfamiliar situation, and then forcing them to make, at least on a theoretical level, extremely big decisions. The biggest one, of course, being like whether or not to kill. And granted, we have like plastic rifles that don't even, go bang. It was still incredibly interesting to watch people who were under this small amount of pressure in what's basically a very safe environment. We're in a downtown theater. They know it's not for real. There's all these actors, and to still see how they would make decisions, who would shoot, who would not shoot. People would come out of the second act crying for various reasons, like, oh, I had no idea it was so easy to kill. Then I saw even like my girlfriend at the time. She came through. She like blasted everybody without hesitation. She's a pastor. So it was from our side of things, being a part of the cast, it was a lot of fun to watch, to see people, how they would respond under pressure. But that's exactly the way that it kind of was for us. Granted, it's kind of on a bigger scale, but also the thing that I really wanted to try to have happen with the play was the sense of disorientation that takes place once you're finished doing that combat stuff. What I wanted to have happen was the audience members leave a room. They had just finished shooting somebody, whatever. They go into a room. It's a cocktail party. Someone takes your rifle, hands you a martini, and you're like, hey, so what was the war like? Where you're like, dude, I was just in combat like 5 seconds ago, and you're already asking me what was it like? Like, what kind of a fucking question is that? And so we tried, and I think we succeeded relatively well, and we would have everything thrown at these people for like 2.5 hours of training, the simulated, combat in the rooms, and then suddenly they're back. We take the rifle, we give them a beer. There's music playing, there's dancing, there's like cabaret and burlesque and all this, and that's just so much wanted to create that sense of like, what the fuck just happened?